The digital clock on the wall read 2:43 a.m., its red digits glowing like embers in the darkened office floor of Vertex Dynamics. The hum of servers was constant, rhythmic, almost comforting, if only anyone had the luxury to notice it. In the top-floor boardroom, 20 of the company's brightest minds were locked in what could only be described as organized chaos. Lines of code scrolled across massive LED screens, error messages flaring like warnings from an unruly storm. Charts glowed red, projections wavered, and the fate of a $150 million AI project hung precariously in the balance. At the center of this storm was Alexandra Reed, CEO of Vertex Dynamics, 45, the kind of leader whose presence alone could bend a room to attention. Her black blazer hugged her frame, her hair pulled into a perfect low bun, and her steel-gray eyes swept across the engineers with the precision of a hawk scanning its territory. Every failed attempt, every miscalculation, every minor hesitation from her team only intensified the silence that followed her commands. "We've been at this for 3 days, with top consultants flown in from Boston, London, and Tokyo," Alexandra said, her voice slicing through the room like a scalpel. "And what do we have? An unstable model, a failed predictive loop, and a client presentation that could destroy the company if we don't fix it before sunrise tomorrow." No one spoke. Sweat beaded on foreheads. Some glanced nervously at the screens, others at Alexandra, avoiding her gaze entirely. Outside, the San Francisco fog rolled over the city in slow, suffocating waves, echoing the tension inside. Meanwhile, in the hallway outside the boardroom, Marcus Cole, night custodian, pushed a mop bucket with mechanical precision. His uniform was faded, shoes scuffed, and one earbud hung loose as a low jazz track played softly. At 38, Marcus looked like any other custodian, but his mind was still wired differently. Formerly a prodigy in algorithmic mathematics at MIT, life had pulled him off the fast track after a tragic car accident claimed the lives of his spouse and left him raising a 5-year-old daughter, Sophie, alone. He wasn't supposed to be in the boardroom tonight. But as he wheeled his bucket past the glass doors, he noticed the chaotic tangle of equations on the whiteboard inside. Something about the setup felt off. It wasn't the usual logical error. It was structural, fundamental, something most engineers overlooked because they were too deep in the weeds. Marcus paused, eyes narrowing. A small red ink stain on the marker tray caught his attention. He remembered the last project he'd touched. Late nights like this, code unraveling before him. And then he saw it, a swapped variable, a misweighted node, a subtle sigmoid curve misaligned with the data flow. To anyone else, it was chaos. To him, it was a mismanaged puzzle with one simple solution. He set his mop in the corner and stepped inside. The room smelled of cold coffee, burnt toast from an overnight snack, and fear. Alexandra's team froze as the door creaked. "Marcus?" muttered one of the senior engineers. What are you doing here?" "I noticed something," Marcus said quietly, almost to himself. He walked toward the whiteboard, marker in hand, eyes scanning the dense code and charts. "Something fundamental. You're looking at this backward." Alexandra appeared silently at the doorway, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She studied him carefully, lips pressed together, a faint crease in her brow. "You think you can fix what 20 top engineers in 3 days of consulting couldn't?" she asked, voice calm but edged with steel. Marcus shrugged lightly. "I don't think I see. Sometimes the simplest solution hides in plain sight." Without another word, he began sketching on the whiteboard. He circled a misaligned node, adjusted a variable, drew a correction curve, and underlined an improperly scaled parameter. His movements were fluid, almost intuitive, like a pianist correcting a discordant note mid-performance. Alexandra watched silently, almost holding her breath. Minutes passed. Then she pulled out her tablet, entered his corrections verbatim, and ran the model. On the massive LED screens, metrics that had wavered dangerously stabilized. Accuracy improved by 20%, error rates dropped by 60%, and the predictive loop finally functioned as designed. The room went silent. One of the senior engineers, Raj Patel, leaned back and muttered, That shouldn't have worked. He's just a custodian." Marcus's eyes met Alexandra's. "Sometimes Being a custodian means cleaning up messes no one else notices, he said quietly. A faint, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of Alexandra's lips. For the first time, she saw not a janitor, but someone who understood the problem at a deeper level than anyone else in the room. "Tomorrow, 8 a.m., conference room B," she said firmly. "You're on the observer list." "This isn't optional," Marcus nodded, heart pounding. He returned to his mop, but a small smile played across his lips as he glanced down at a crumpled drawing from Sophie tucked into his pocket, a doodle of a man holding a mop in one hand and a glowing circuit in the other. The night stretched on, the fog outside thickening, but inside the boardroom, a new reality had emerged. The overlooked, underestimated man had become the key to saving a $150 million contract, and Alexandra, for the first time in years, felt the thrill of witnessing true talent, unexpected, raw, unpolished, and brilliant. By the time Marcus left the building in the early hours of morning, carrying his mop and thoughts alike, he knew something had shifted, not just the trajectory of the project, but the trajectory of his life. Somewhere far above the polished desks, charts, and glowing screens, a single act of observation and insight had rewritten the story of both a company and a man who had learned to see what others could not. The morning fog over San Francisco lingered like a soft gray veil, but inside Vertex Dynamics the atmosphere was tense, electric. Marcus Cole stepped out of the elevator onto the 21st floor, the weight of the night's events still pressing on his shoulders. Gone were the scuffed shoes and faded uniform. He now wore a crisp, light blue shirt, neatly pressed, with the lucky stone from Sophie tucked safely into his pocket. The tiny reminder of his daughter's belief in him gave him a small surge of courage. The conference room, dubbed Strategic Room B, was a vast expanse of glass, polished wood, and high-tech equipment. Around the table sat product heads, engineers, CFOs, and board representatives, most of whom had spent years climbing corporate ladders while Marcus had been relegated to cleaning floors. Their conversation ceased as Alexandra Reed entered, calm but commanding as ever, her black blazer immaculate and her presence radiating authority. "That's your seat," she said, gesturing to a chair at the far end. Marcus hesitated for a fraction of a second, scanning the room. The collective skepticism of seasoned professionals hung thick in the air. Several eyes flicked toward him, not with curiosity, but with barely concealed judgment. Mark Benson, senior systems engineer, leaned back, arms crossed. "You realize this is highly unusual, right?" he said, his voice measured but cold. "We're talking about code that runs production-level AI systems. You haven't run a deployment at this scale before." Marcus gave a calm nod. "I understand. But yesterday's fix demonstrated that the right insight can be more powerful than credentials alone." The murmur of dissent that followed was muted only by Alexandra's steady gaze. "Let's begin. We're here to review the AI latency problem. This is the same predictive loop that nearly collapsed last week. I want clear solutions and no hand-waving." The screen flickered, showing charts that had haunted Marcus's dreams for the past 3 nights. Latency spikes glimmered red against a backdrop of otherwise green metrics. Alexandra continued, "We've incorporated Marcus's adjustments into the test environment. Let's see how they perform at scale." The team's skepticism was palpable. Whispers floated across the table. "He's just a janitor. What if this fails?" Marcus's gaze remained steady, scanning the numbers, anticipating patterns, almost intuitively knowing the weak nodes before anyone else did. A technician at the back tapped nervously on a keyboard. "Replication parameters are ready," she said, eyes flicking toward Marcus. "Shall we run it?" Alexandra's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "Proceed." As the simulation began, the screen flickered once, twice, and then stabilized. Performance bars shifted, yellow, pale green, deep green. The first wave of murmurs ran through the room. Marcus's adjustments were holding, but the calm lasted only seconds. The main 3D model, spinning representations of predictive analytics, began to lag. Frames skipped, latency indicators blinked perilously close to red. Gasps and quiet groans filled the space. Mark leaned toward Alexandra, his voice just loud enough for the room to hear. "I warned you. We shouldn't be testing this at a live client demo. It's too risky." Alexandra, unflinching, replied, "Keep watching." Her eyes briefly locked on Marcus. The unspoken trust was a subtle but powerful signal. She believed in him, and for now, that belief was the only buffer against disaster. Marcus's fingers flew over the keyboard. Instinct guided him, each keystroke a countermeasure against cascading errors. He accessed the real-time optimization module he had built in the shadows of his custodial duties, rewriting minor parameters, rebalancing weights, and injecting small, precise adjustments. Beads of sweat formed on his brow. The room held its collective breath. Senior engineers leaned forward, skeptical but transfixed. Minutes felt like hours. Then, almost imperceptibly, the lag indicators began to stabilize. Frames synchronized. Performance bars glowed a vibrant green. The simulation ran smoother than it had ever done in the past week. A quiet murmur rose into applause from the staff, tempered by disbelief. Mark's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Alexandra's gaze remained fixed, unwavering, almost proud. Accuracy metrics, she asked. Marcus pointed at the screen. Error reduction of 63%. Latency improvement of 18 milliseconds. Well beyond pre-incident levels. The room went silent again, only this time in awe rather than tension. Marcus leaned back slightly, letting the relief wash over him for a heartbeat. But he didn't relax fully. He knew this was just the beginning. After the meeting, Alexandra approached him privately, holding 2 takeaway coffee cups. She handed one to Marcus. You held your own in there. Not many would have dared to touch the live system mid-demo, Marcus smiled faintly. I wasn't trying to prove anything. Just fix what needed fixing. Interesting approach, Alexandra said. Most people with your skill set, or assumed lack thereof, would have second-guessed themselves. You didn't. Her eyes softened for the briefest moment, betraying the rigid mask she usually wore. Marcus nodded. Years of practice, mopping floors, fixing broken systems, explaining complex concepts to a 5-year-old. It teaches you to find the simplest path through chaos. She studied him, the light from the windows highlighting a momentary vulnerability in her usually stoic expression. Tomorrow, you'll attend the strategy review for the Seattle client presentation. Full access. And don't be surprised if some people resist your presence. Marcus accepted this without hesitation. Understood. I'll be ready. Despite the success, Marcus noticed subtle changes in the office. Conversations that once flowed casually now paused when he approached. Emails he received were courteous but clipped. The engineers he had collaborated with for years now looked at him with thinly veiled skepticism, muttering about luck and shortcuts behind closed doors. Mark Benson's disapproval was more vocal. Code written by someone without an engineering degree, never deployed at scale. It's a risk. Clients care about titles and credentials, not intuition. Alexandra's response was calm, sharp, and uncompromising. Clients care about results, and the results speak for themselves. Even as the tension persisted, Marcus began noticing another subtle shift. Small nods of reluctant respect from a few engineers who had initially doubted him. Eyes that had rolled now lingered just for a moment before returning to their screens. The first seeds of change were being sown. Later that evening, Marcus returned to his usual night shift duties. The halls smelled faintly of cleaning solution and leftover coffee. He paused, looking at the stack of papers Sophie had drawn on, diagrams of computers, robots, and even a little version of him holding a mop. A reminder of why he kept pushing, even when others doubted him. Alexandra appeared unexpectedly, her coat draped over her arm, her expression uncharacteristically soft. "You're free tonight?" she asked. "I suppose I am," Marcus replied cautiously. She gestured toward a quiet cafe in North Beach, the warm glow spilling into the foggy night. "I need to think." "Want to come?" Marcus hesitated. Then he followed. Inside, the room smelled of roasted garlic, warm bread, and the sea air slipping in from the open windows. They sat together, two people from wildly different worlds, sharing stories of lost loved ones, childhood memories, and small victories. Marcus told her about Sophie, the nights alone, the lessons learned mopping floors and debugging code alike. Alexandra shared glimpses of her own life, what it meant to lead, to calculate risk, to survive in a world where trust was scarce. It was in that quiet that Marcus realized the scope of what was happening. He was no longer merely a janitor who stumbled upon a solution. He had begun to step into a world of influence, scrutiny, and opportunity. And with it came new responsibilities, both professional and personal. The night ended, fog rolling thicker across the city streets. They parted ways at the corner, Alexandra's words hanging in the air like a promise. Tomorrow, you'll sit in on the most critical meeting of your life. Be ready. Some won't like it, but that doesn't matter. Marcus nodded. A small smile played across his lips. Sophie's drawing in his pocket reminded him why he endured the skepticism, the pressure, and the stakes. He was doing it for her, and for himself. The sun had barely pierced the fog over San Francisco when Marcus Cole arrived at Vertex Dynamics' 18th floor conference hall. His hands felt slightly clammy despite the crisp light blue shirt he had carefully ironed. The lucky stone from Sophie nestled safely in his pocket. Today wasn't about cleaning up after mistakes or quietly adjusting code at night. Today, every keystroke, every insight, every instinct would be on display in front of the most powerful clients the company had ever hosted. The hall was vast, with high ceilings and a long glass table that reflected the sterile white lights overhead. LED screens dominated the front wall, displaying AI performance metrics, predictive models, and interactive 3D simulations. Chairs were filled by clients flown in from Seattle, executives whose signatures could secure multi-million-dollar contracts or deny them. The air buzzed with low murmurs of anticipation, and Marcus could feel the weight of every gaze, evaluating, judging. Expecting nothing of him, Alexandra Reed entered first. Minimalist in a black suit, her expression calm, authoritative. She didn't glance at Marcus immediately. She had seen him yesterday, and now it was his moment to prove himself under the scrutiny of outsiders. "Thank you all for joining us," she began, her voice steady, carrying clearly to every corner of the hall. "Today you'll witness a new level of AI responsiveness and predictive accuracy. Our team has worked tirelessly to ensure the integrity of the system, and we're here to demonstrate real-time problem-solving should any issue arise." Marcus stationed himself at the technical console at the back of the room. The headset was snug, laptop ready. His heart raced, not with fear, but with the anticipation of testing everything he had learned. Every lesson from years of quiet observation, late-night coding, and parenting Sophie. The presentation began flawlessly. Simulations ran smoothly, metrics glowed green, and interactive 3D models rotated without lag. Clients nodded, murmured comments circulated, and Alexandra's pacing across the stage was deliberate, measured, authoritative. Then, just as confidence rippled through the room, a sudden latency spike occurred. The 3D models slowed. The predictive loop blinked yellow. A ripple of whispers moved across the first rows. Marcus's fingers hovered over the keyboard. It was the moment he had been preparing for. The system's fault wasn't catastrophic, but it was subtle, just enough to shake confidence in an audience trained to detect perfection. "Buffer overflow," a technician muttered into her headset. "Restart will take at least 3 minutes. That's a lifetime in this demo." Marcus exhaled slowly. No panic, no hesitation. He accessed the live optimization module he had built in the shadows of late nights. Each parameter, each node adjustment, each correction had been calculated, visualized, and tested, but never under this level of pressure. He typed, adjusted, recalibrated, each action precise, instinctive, almost surgical. The latency indicators blinked, stuttered, and then gradually the performance bars shifted from yellow to pale green, then deep green. The 3D model resumed its smooth rotation. The room held its collective breath for a moment, and then erupted into cautious applause. The clients leaned forward. "Impressive," one of the Seattle executives said. "The system recovered seamlessly in real time." Alexandra's eyes flicked toward Marcus, just enough for him to feel the weight of her trust. "Your work has ensured not just functionality but reliability," she said, her voice measured. "That's why Vertex Dynamics remains ahead of the curve in AI development." But the tension didn't dissipate entirely. Mark Benson, senior engineer, leaned back in his chair, clearly uncomfortable. "Code written by someone without a formal engineering degree. Never deployed in production before. I still question the precedent this sets, he muttered, mutely glancing at Marcus. Marcus didn't flinch. The numbers speak for themselves. The question isn't who fixed it, but that it works. Silence gripped the room. Alexandra's lips pressed together in approval. Marcus's heart, steady despite the pressure, beat in rhythm with the screens that now glowed steady. Green, unshakable. After the presentation, Marcus returned to the back office where the technical team debriefed. While the client's praise was gratifying, the true test was internal, corporate politics. Skepticism and the subtle friction of being the new, unconventional talent in a high-level environment. Alexandra approached him quietly. Not everyone is going to be happy you're here, she said, handing him a coffee cup. Some will resist change. Some will doubt you. Some will watch your every move for any perceived misstep. Marcus nodded. I expected that. Skepticism is part of growth, and I've spent years proving to myself that insight doesn't always require a title. She studied him for a moment, the corners of her mouth lifting faintly. You have a point. But influence requires more than insight. It requires timing, diplomacy, and sometimes knowing when to let others believe they've led the solution. Marcus smirked lightly.
So when do I get to lead, not just observe?
Soon, Alexandra replied, her gaze sharp but encouraging. But first, you need to earn their trust, not just their results. And some people will resist until they see it firsthand. That night, as Marcus returned home, he found Sophie asleep on the couch, her stuffed animals scattered around her. He gently lifted her into his arms, careful not to wake her, and sat beside the window, watching the fog swirl around the city. The distant hum of the Bay Bridge and the faint twinkling lights below reminded him why he endured the skepticism, the pressure, the judgment. It wasn't about proving himself to the world. It was about showing Sophie that determination, intuition, and quiet brilliance can overcome assumptions and limitations. That being overlooked doesn't mean being powerless. That sometimes the smallest insight can create the largest impact. The following morning, Marcus returned to Vertex Dynamics, knowing the next challenge was imminent. Internal strategy sessions with senior engineers and board members, evaluating his methods in depth. He would face quiet hostility, veiled skepticism, and perhaps open resistance. Yet he felt ready. The room was colder than the previous day. Mark Benson's gaze lingered on Marcus longer, measuring, calculating, anticipating a failure. Other engineers whispered, casting subtle glances. Alexandra's calm presence, however, reassured Marcus that while others might resist, she trusted him, her unspoken support the buffer against doubt. Marcus understood the game. He wasn't just solving AI problems. He was navigating corporate hierarchies, proving that merit could outshine titles, that intuition could outweigh credentials, and that human insight could overcome systemic bias. The morning sun barely warmed the glass and steel corridors of Vertex Dynamics, yet inside the air was thick with tension. Marcus Cole walked down the 21st floor hallway, the subtle hum of servers and the distant clatter of keyboards creating a rhythm he had come to understand. He had proven himself once in front of the Seattle clients, but internal acceptance was proving to be a far more treacherous challenge. Inside Strategic Room C, the senior engineering team gathered. Marcus's chair was no longer at the periphery. Alexandra had formally integrated him into high-level technical meetings. Yet his presence was met with cautious glances, whispered comments, and thinly veiled hostility. Mark Benson, arms crossed and lips pressed in a firm line, was first to speak. I still don't understand why we are including someone without formal deployment experience in critical design discussions. Credentials exist for a reason. Marcus didn't respond immediately. He had learned patience, how to let skepticism simmer until the moment demanded a subtle, quiet response. Results exist for a reason too, he replied evenly. Yesterday's simulation stabilized under live conditions that had failed multiple times before. The system ran flawlessly because the correct insight was applied, not because of the uniform someone wore or the school they attended. A ripple of silence followed. Several engineers looked away, uncomfortable, while Alexandra's sharp gaze cut through the tension. Focus on solutions, not titles, she said. Marcus's contributions will be evaluated based on their merit. Even as she spoke, Marcus sensed the underlying currents of rivalry. Whispers behind closed doors. Subtle undermining. The kind of politics where success could be twisted into a risk in the eyes of those unwilling to accept unconventional talent. 2 days later, Marcus was reviewing the system independently. The team had implemented his live adjustments into the core predictive loop, and while most metrics were stable, a subtle anomaly caught his eye. A chain of dependency in the neural pathways was showing intermittent misalignment, not enough to trigger outright failure, but sufficient to reduce efficiency during complex multivariable simulations. The senior engineers had overlooked it, preoccupied with immediate fixes and visible metrics. Marcus leaned over his laptop, tracing the flow of logic. Each node, each input, each weighted variable revealed a pattern, a flaw that even the most seasoned engineers had missed. His mind raced, connecting dots the team hadn't even noticed existed. He picked up a red marker from the conference room table and sketched the anomaly across a whiteboard, circling nodes, drawing arrows, annotating the misweighted variables. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone not paying close attention. Yet he knew it could cascade into a significant failure during client-facing simulations or production deployment. Just as he was finalizing the annotations, Alexandra appeared in the doorway, her presence as commanding as ever, yet carrying a hint of curiosity. "You've been here for hours," she said. "Finding something that everyone else missed?" Marcus straightened. "It's subtle, but if it propagates into the main predictive loop, it could cause latency spikes during complex simulations. Nobody caught it because it isn't obvious in standard tests. It's buried in dependencies." Her gaze scanned the whiteboard. The red annotations, the arrows, the carefully marked variables. She raised a brow. "So this is what you noticed on instinct?" Marcus nodded. "Not instinct alone. Experience, intuition, pattern recognition, and maybe a bit of stubbornness." Alexandra allowed a faint smile, the first in weeks. "Show me." Later that afternoon, the senior engineering team convened to discuss Marcus's findings. Marcus, now an official observer and contributor, stepped forward to present. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Mark Benson leaned back, skeptical. "This is interesting, but we've run multiple stress tests already. Why should we believe this anomaly could impact production?" Marcus pointed to the whiteboard. "The tests measure only predefined variables. The anomaly is conditional, dependent on multi-node interactions that are unlikely to appear during standard runs, but unavoidable under certain client-specific scenarios. If ignored, it could compromise the predictive integrity of the system." A quiet murmur ran through the room. Some engineers whispered to one another, impressed but unwilling to openly acknowledge it. Alexandra's voice cut through the room. "Mark, I want you to review these findings immediately. Marcus's observation is now part of the core evaluation. We're not discussing whether it's convenient, only whether it's accurate. And if it is, we fix it before it affects clients." Mark's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Marcus could feel the subtle shift. He wasn't universally accepted, but his competence was undeniable. The following morning, Marcus and a small subset of engineers ran simulations incorporating his corrections. Metrics shifted in real time, revealing a reduction in latency spikes, smoother predictive behavior, and improved efficiency across previously problematic multivariable scenarios. Alexandra observed quietly, her gaze unwavering. "Explain the improvement to the board," she instructed. Marcus turned, projecting confidence. "The anomaly was conditional, buried in dependencies invisible to standard stress tests. By rebalancing the weights and realigning the nodes, we've ensured stability even under complex, untested conditions. This reduces latency by 22 milliseconds on average and eliminates rare but critical predictive errors." The board members nodded, some impressed, some incredulous. Whispers of admiration reached Marcus's ears. Even Mark's expression softened, the faintest hint of reluctant respect forming. That night, Marcus returned home exhausted. Sophie was asleep in her room, the faint light of her night lamp spilling over her stuffed animals. He held her close, whispering softly about the day. The stakes were larger than ever. One miscalculation could cost the company millions. And yet, in Sophie's eyes, he was a hero simply for persevering. It was this duality, the professional pressure and the personal motivation that gave Marcus his edge. While the corporate world measured him by credentials, deadlines, and risk, his daughter measured him by courage, dedication, and integrity. And in the quiet of the night, those measures felt far more real. Marcus's discovery had solidified his value, but corporate politics were far from neutralized. Subtle sabotage, lingering skepticism, and the looming presence of board-level observers promised another trial. A high-stakes presentation where Marcus would need to apply his insight under scrutiny from clients, executives, and his most critical doubters. The morning sun struggled to pierce the foggy skyline of San Francisco, casting long shadows across the glass and steel corridors of Vertex Dynamics. Marcus Cole stood outside the 21st floor conference hall, his heartbeat steady but forceful, each pulse echoing the stakes of the day. Today wasn't a rehearsal. Today wasn't a controlled simulation. Today, he would present live before the board of directors, the Seattle clients, and the full spectrum of skeptics, including Mark Benson, whose lingering doubts had shadowed Marcus since day one. His light blue shirt was freshly pressed, the lucky stone from Sophie tucked in his pocket as an anchor of courage. Alexandra Reed, calm and composed in her minimalist black suit, stepped beside him. "Remember," she said quietly, her eyes sharp yet encouraging, "it's not about titles. It's about solutions. You know this system better than anyone in this room. Trust your instincts and your experience." Marcus nodded, inhaling deeply. "I've got this." The conference hall was cavernous, filled with the hum of anticipation. LED walls displayed real-time AI metrics, predictive models, and interactive simulations. Clients from Seattle, board members, and senior executives formed a semicircle around the long glass table, their eyes fixed on Marcus's position at the technical console in the back. The air was tense, every breath weighted with expectation. Alexandra stepped onto the stage first, her voice cutting clearly through the room. "Thank you all for being here. Today, we demonstrate not just Vertex Dynamics' AI capabilities, but our ability to adapt, overcome, and solve unexpected challenges in real time. We will show you the system as it stands, and how it responds under pressure." Marcus's eyes scanned the room, noting subtle reactions, curiosity, skepticism, anticipation, and a faint undercurrent of doubt. Mark Benson's gaze lingered a second too long, the set of his jaw signaling he was prepared to challenge every step Marcus took. The demo began flawlessly. Predictive models rotated in 3D, latency metrics glowed green, and interactive simulations responded instantly to client inputs. The murmurs of approval began, light and hesitant. Then, just as the audience's confidence grew, the neural loop indicators flickered yellow. A lag spike, a minor anomaly, but enough to draw attention. Whispers passed through the room. A technician muttered into the headset, "Could be a memory overflow. Restart could take 3 minutes, too long for a live demo." Marcus's fingers hovered above the keyboard, instincts firing in tandem with years of preparation. He didn't panic. He didn't hesitate. He dove into the live system, executing a series of real-time adjustments. Weighted nodes realigned, dependencies recalibrated, and input channels harmonized. The LED walls reacted immediately. The performance bars shifted from yellow to pale green, then deep green. The 3D models rotated flawlessly. The lag vanished. Silence fell for a heartbeat. Then applause erupted, first tentative, then overwhelming. Alexandra's voice carried across the room. "This is the system at its optimized state, responding to real-time conditions seamlessly." The Seattle client leaned forward. "Impressive. Real-time correction during live demonstration. That's beyond expectations. How was this achieved?" Marcus spoke calmly, confidently. The anomaly was subtle, dependent on multi-node interactions hidden from standard stress tests. By applying real-time optimization and correcting the underlying dependencies, the system stabilized instantly. The room fell silent again, every eye on him. Even Mark Benson, seated stiffly at the table, didn't speak, his expression betraying both astonishment and grudging respect. After the presentation, Marcus stepped aside to debrief Alexandra. "You handled that flawlessly," she said, handing him a coffee cup. The board and clients are impressed. More importantly, you've silenced every skeptic. Marcus shook his head. Not everyone will be convinced by one demo, she smiled faintly. Perhaps. But sometimes, one demonstration is enough to shift perception. You've earned your place here, not as an observer, not as a janitor, but as someone whose insight is invaluable. And that's permanent. The weight of her words settled over him. This wasn't temporary recognition or a fleeting triumph. This was the kind of validation that transformed careers, lives, and legacies. Later that day, the board convened privately. Alexandra formally proposed Marcus's promotion to the core development team, a move that solidified his transition from night janitor to indispensable technical innovator. The vote passed unanimously, with only a faint hesitation from Mark, whose respect had quietly eclipsed his skepticism. That evening, Marcus returned home to Sophie. She was asleep, her soft breathing a balm after the tension of the day. He held her gently, whispering the news. "Daddy got a new job today," he said, careful not to wake her. "A really important one. You've been with me through all of it." Sophie stirred slightly, murmuring in her sleep. "You did it, Daddy." Marcus smiled, a quiet, unrestrained relief washing over him. The victory wasn't just professional. It was personal, a demonstration to his daughter that perseverance, intuition, and courage could overcome assumptions, barriers, and expectations. The following week, Marcus walked through Vertex Dynamics with a newfound confidence. He was no longer the outsider at the edges of meetings, the quiet observer silently correcting mistakes. His presence was acknowledged, respected, and actively sought in critical discussions. Mark Benson approached him, an unexpected smile on his face. "Marcus," he said quietly, "I underestimated you." "I was wrong." "Welcome to the team," Marcus nodded, a faint grin forming. "Thank you. But you're going to keep pushing me, aren't you?" Mark chuckled, always. Someone has to keep you sharp. Even the whispers that once followed him, the murmurs questioning his credentials and capability, had shifted to acknowledgement, curiosity, and cautious admiration. On the rooftop balcony, overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge, Alexandra handed Marcus 2 cups of coffee. The fog clung to the skyline, but the city below glimmered with promise. "You've proven yourself," she said, her voice softening. "Not because of luck, but because of insight, courage, and relentless focus." Marcus raised his cup. "Couldn't have done it without someone who trusted me enough to let me try." She smiled faintly. "Perhaps. But sometimes trust is about seeing potential when others can't, and letting it flourish." The two stood in silence, the wind carrying the briny scent of the bay, their footsteps on the balcony slow, deliberate. The dynamic between them had shifted, respect, trust, and mutual acknowledgement replacing hierarchy and expectation. Months later, as Vertex Dynamics rolled out the optimized AI system to global clients, Marcus's influence became visible across projects. Yet true to the story's viral DNA, his greatest impact was often invisible to outsiders. Small tweaks, subtle insights, and intuitive fixes that prevented major failures before they could arise. Sophie remained his anchor, a reminder that heroism isn't just about recognition, but about responsibility, courage, and quiet perseverance. And Alexandra, the once cold CEO, had learned that unconventional talent could catalyze unprecedented innovation. In the corridors of Vertex Dynamics, one lesson was clear. Sometimes the people overlooked, those who clean the floors, watch quietly from the edges, or operate outside the formal system, hold the answers that others have been chasing. And sometimes, the smallest act of trust, the decision to let someone step forward despite assumptions, becomes the catalyst for the greatest leaps forward.